Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton joining us now. Senator, I just can't imagine that sits well with the American people, being told that, you know what, maybe we'll never get to the bottom of this.
Yes, Sandra, I think most Americans can follow the facts in front of their face and their common sense and conclude that this virus almost certainly came from those labs. It's unfortunate that you still have so many Biden administration officials who refuse to acknowledge that fact. We heard it today from intelligence officials who continue to beat around the bush, even though the FBI has said very clearly they think it almost certainly came from the lab. Recently, the Department of Energy Intelligence Cell did so as well. And I think that's because they don't want to face up to the facts. The Biden administration doesn't want to acknowledge that this virus almost certainly came from those labs because they don't want to take the actions the American people would expect them to. Things like revoking China's most favored nation status, or banning TikTok, or preventing Chinese nationals from buying farmland in America. So you continue to see them beat around the bush and hem and haw rather than following the evidence and common sense to its logical conclusion.
So the latest question in all of this, Senator, is why Anthony Fauci, in the early days of the COVID pandemic in 2020, pushed to have this assessment done on the origins of COVID. Your colleague, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, who's gone toe-to-toe with Fauci more than a few times, had this assessment. Listen here.
It was an elaborate cover-up, and it began in January of 2020. The reason Dr. Fauci didn't want any attention drawn to this or to his funding of the lab is that ultimately he would have culpability. Ultimately, there's a responsibility.
Senator, if it is ultimately found that U.S. taxpayer dollars through some circuitous process got to the Wuhan lab and did fund gain-of-function research, what, in your estimation, should happen?
Well, I think Rand Paul is onto something there. I believe that Tony Fauci from the very beginning went into overdrive to try to suppress even conversation about the possibility the virus came from the labs because of his deep ties and relationships to people at those labs or in the Chinese public health bureaucracy or funding that his organization at the NIH was granting, even against the direction of the Obama administration going back to 2014. So I think Tony Fauci has a lot of explaining to do, and I suspect he's going to be explaining it to Congress very soon.
All right, so you just referenced the Senate Intel hearing today, which obviously you're a member of, and you just referenced the testimony from it. We've got some of what came from some of the interactions in that room. I'll have that for you in just a second. But what would you say you are hearing from lawmakers about how far they're willing to go with this? If indeed Anthony Fauci was not transparency on what he knew and when he knew it, what's the plan to hold him accountable? Real quick, here's the sound from that testimony you just referenced.
Will we not be able to say that we believe that the lab origin is the likeliest outcome unless somehow we can provide a smoking gun proof that that's what happened?
What would change, essentially elements' perspectives, that it be additional information?
I just don't understand why you continue to maintain on behalf of the intelligence community that these are two equally plausible explanations. They simply are not.
I think I share your frustration with the fact that China hasn't been more cooperative on this issue to provide intelligence that would be of use to the scientists.
I mean, why are we here today, Senator? Why is this taking so long when we hear from so many members of Congress that they know definitively that Dr. Anthony Fauci knew other things, that they know definitively that this virus came from that lab? So why are we here in this moment today?
So, Sandra, I think it's a mix of reasons. For Tony Fauci and the public health bureaucracy, I think they're trying to cover their tracks on what they were doing, again, in direct violation of what the Obama administration directed. Second, I think the Biden administration, at the highest reaches, President Biden himself, don't want to acknowledge that this virus in all likelihood came from those labs because they don't want it to be forced to take tough actions against Chinese communists. And third, it's political going back to the beginnings of this pandemic. If Tom Cotton or Donald Trump or any other Republican was saying these kind of things, then they wanted to oppose it, whatever it was. And the fact that this virus almost certainly came from the lab is just another example of it.
Congressman, I want to change gears if I could and ask you about this incident down in Matamoros, Mexico, in which 2 Americans were killed. One was severely wounded, and the other seems to be okay and is in a hospital in Brownsville, Texas. The big question is, what do we do about these drug cartels? Your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a short time ago said he believes that they should be declared foreign terrorist organizations. Here's what he said.
That if there were an ISIS or Al-Qaeda cell in Mexico that lobbed a rocket into Texas, we'd wipe them off the planet. They're doing that times thousands.
In your military career, Senator, you went after Al-Qaeda and ISIS. What should we do about the cartels?
Well, John, it's a terrible news story about the loss of the 2 American lives and the other 2 wounded. Lindsey Graham is right, though. We're losing 100,000 Americans every single year to drug deaths, almost exclusively because of Mexican drug cartels. And I get a question that you posed to me a lot from Arkansans, and I always turn around to a question to them, and I'll do it to your viewers as well. If ISIS and Al-Qaeda had set up shop in Juarez or Monterrey or Tijuana, what would you expect your government to do if they were killing 100,000 Americans a year? And whatever that is, that's exactly what we should do to them in Mexico, with or without the Mexican government. We have a long history of our military protecting us from these threats from drug traffickers and narco-terrorists. We toppled an entire government in Panama in 1989 because of drug trafficking. It's well known that special operation forces were present in Colombia in 1993 when Pablo Escobar was killed. It's well known they were present a few years back when El Chapo was arrested in Mexico. If the Mexican government will not or cannot stop these cartels from killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, then America should.
Real quick follow-up there, Senator. I know you've done so much work on this and so much digging into this. And I brought up the money trail last hour as far as those cartels and the money that they have. We know they're here, and we know they're killing Americans on American soil as well. What can you tell us about our ability to track the massive amounts of money that they are bringing in? And they're bringing it in here, and many times, I mean, you see these arrests happen quite frequently, money laundering right here in the United States. So do we have a money trail on these cartels here in the United States?
Well, Sandra, over the last 20 years of war with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other foreign terrorist organizations, we've developed incredible abilities to track illicit money and money laundering. We can use those same tools against the cartels, just like we can use the same surveillance tools that we use to track down people like Osama bin Laden or Ayman al-Zawahiri to track down the cartel leaders as well. It simply takes leaders in Washington who are committed to protecting the American people from this grave threat.
Well, the pressure is rising. We'll see if the Biden administration is prepared to react. Senator, great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.